Good day and welcome to the Self-Sufficiency Research Clearinghouse and Federal Office of Child Support Enforcement Free Child Support Strategies to Increase Family Self-Sufficiency Webinar. Today's call is being recorded. At this time, I would like to turn it over to Deborah Gilmore. Please go ahead.
Thank you, and a warm welcome to all of you who are able to join us today on behalf of the Self-Sufficiency Research Clearinghouse, which is who I represent, or SSRC, as we like to call it. As we do at the start of each of our webinars, I'll briefly share the array of resources that the SSRC offers to you, which is ever expanding. So if you've heard it before, hopefully you'll glean something new today. And then I will turn things over after that to our main presenters. The Self-Sufficiency Research Clearinghouse is a virtual portal of research and other resources related to self-sufficiency. It functions as an online community for researchers, practitioners, and other stakeholders who are interested in self-sufficiency in employment and in family and child well-being. The SSRC's purpose is to disseminate quality research. We currently have more than 3,400 items housed in our library, and we continuously add new resources. Every item that is included in our library is reviewed for relevancy first. And the SSRC's materials are organized into 12 topical areas comprising the field of self-sufficiency. You can perform searches in our library by keyword or customize your search using any combination of the provided filters, such as reference type, target population, geographic location, or research methodology. If you select the Search Library tab on our website, you will also find our events archive, where you can access previous webinar recordings and materials, and that's where we'll add this webinar and its materials in the coming weeks. The Browse Topics tab on our website lets you view a selection of resources categorized by those 12 topical areas. Every topical area page has an Our Librarian Recommends box that highlights research and resources recommended by the SSRC library team. And each topical area page also includes relevant federal laws and regulations. Under the Stay Connected tab, you'll see other entities who are involved in self-sufficiency research and a list of organizations that have partnered with the SSRC previously to host events and share publications related to the field. You'll also find an events calendar with in-person and virtual events all related to the field of self-sufficiency. And finally, the SSRC houses a number of data sets and sources to support program management and facilitate improved outcomes for children, families, and communities. One thing I also wanted to mention, on your screen, you will see what we call a pod or a box that's marked Files. And in that, you will see something called Webinar Slides-Notes PDF. That is a handout version of all of today's slides. You can select it, then select Download File. For me, that opens in a new tab. For you, that may open in a new window in your browser. And once you've opened that or saved it and then opened it, you can return to us by selecting the on the very bottom of your screen, returning to the Adobe Connect icon. I'm going to turn things over in just a minute to our moderator, Jennifer Burnszynski, and she will introduce our speakers, give you some background on the shifting vision of child support for our Federal Office of Child Support Enforcement, and then give you a brief introduction to the 3 child support strategies that our other wonderful presenters are going to expand on today from their experiences. And as you are listening, we encourage you to share your questions by submitting them through the question and answer feature, as I see many people are already able to use. It's located, if you haven't seen it yet, on the bottom right of your screen, or usually is. We will answer each of your topically related questions after the presentation. If you're having technical difficulties, we do try to get to those as they're received. If we run out of time, we will answer those through written responses that we'll post on the SSRC site's events archive, along with the other webinar materials after today's event. And now, I do want to turn things over to Jennifer Burnszynski, Director of the Division of Program Innovation in the Federal Office of Child Support Enforcement, our partner in bringing you today's webinar. Jennifer.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, and thanks to everyone for joining us this afternoon. I'm happy that the Office of Child Support Enforcement is able to co-host this webinar. And I'll just start things out by giving sort of a very brief high-level introduction to the Child Support Program and what's been going on recently for folks who may not be familiar. And then I will introduce our presenters and over for their wonderful presentation. But just to give you a basic idea of what the Child Support Program is, it is the federal government providing funds to state and tribal child support agencies. The very kind of high-level statutory functions of the program are to establish legal paternity, to set legal child support orders, either in a court or through an administrative process, to obtain child support payments through a number of means, to provide access to health care coverage for children and now also parents. We connect parents to work and other supports and also have a goal of strengthening parental ties. The federal government provides a 66% match to states and tribes. So the Child Support Program is an open-ended entitlement, and that federal funding is a 66% match there.
Jennifer, this is Deborah, and I apologize for interrupting you, but I am still seeing that a number of people are not able to hear the webinar. Melissa, is there a way to put up a whiteboard or something and let folks know we're trying to resolve that issue?
Yep, I'm going to put something out right now. Thanks.
Thank you.
Give you an idea of who participates in the Child Support Program. Overall, there are about 17 million children in the program. So this is about a quarter of all children in the country, and roughly about half of all poor children participate. Most of the custodial parents in the program are mothers, but important to note that 17% are fathers. And just under half, 39% of parents were not married to each other. Give you an idea of kind of what participation in the Child Support Program looks like compared to other human services programs and health programs. You can see that with 17 million kids, child support is roughly the size of SNAP. Child support is a very important component of self-sufficiency, particularly for families who are in poverty. Just to give you a little idea, looking at this chart, child support is about 16% of income for all custodial families that receive it. But for poor families that receive it, it's just a huge part of that family budget, 52%. So it can play a really critical difference in what family income looks like and what's available to the child there. But of course, child support is about more than money. It encourages mothers and fathers to be involved in their children's lives. The program itself established over 1.6 million paternities in a year. So that's establishing legal paternity for children who would not have had it by virtue of marriage. Legal paternity is important because it links children to a number of benefits through their father and also provides stronger linkages to those paternal relatives. Child support also has a positive effect on children's educational success, and research kind of suggests that it may have a greater impact than other types of income, knowing that it's coming from within the family and from a parent there. So the Child Support Program has actually been changing quite a bit in the last 5 or 10 years. Our mission is really evolving. The goal of the program is to help families, again, by squarely focusing on promoting family self-sufficiency and child well-being. The Child Support Program has made a lot of policy updates. More are coming, focused on building a lot of new partnerships, some of which you'll hear more about. And really ramped up our efforts to rigorously evaluate our work. Let me talk a little bit about some of the shift we've seen. Child support agencies are moving to use more early intervention strategies to get parents kind of on the right track right away, to have them understanding what child support means and kind of what they need to do. and opening up lines of communication with the child support agency, with the goal being to really prevent a big buildup of debt and to stop problems before they start. Child support agencies are also focusing much more on setting realistic orders, so those would be orders that are kind of the right size and that parents can pay. And they're also focusing on facilitating modifications to those orders so that they stay at the right size as people lose a job or get promoted or things like that. Child support has a pretty good amount of data on the folks in its caseload and is doing a much better job at kind of culling through that data to try to really differentiate among the different kinds of families and different kinds of parents in the caseload and really use what is going to be the right enforcement tool for that family. So we have a full range of tools. Some are much better for parents that have the ability to pay, that have income and assets, but are choosing not to pay. Some tools are going to be much better for parents who actually don't have the ability to pay and are really struggling to get income and support themselves as well as their children. And we'll hear more about that as well. Child support agencies are also focusing much more on serving both parents, better services for non-custodial parents to encourage cooperation, communication with the child support agency, and also encouraging payments. And then, of course, much more assistance and focusing on moving non-custodial parents who are unable to pay, empowering them with what they need to be able to make regular child support payments. Partnerships are a very important piece of this sort of evolution in the child support program. I just wanted to show you that this graphic, we call it the bubble charter. It's a bit of a guiding star for some of the changes in the child support program, and it really speaks to us in the program, I think, and hopefully those outside about how child support interacts with a number of other human services approaches to serving families. So, for example, child support has a role to play in talking about preventing early and unwanted pregnancy by talking about the financial responsibilities of parenthood. We do a lot. We serve many families who've experienced domestic violence, and collaborating with domestic violence advocates and service providers to assure safe access to services is very important. We connect kids to health care coverage, and so do a lot both with healthcare programs and others who are reaching out to families to help them find coverage. We address the relationship between families, and so rely on partnerships with others who are kind of promoting healthy family relationships, can help parents co-parent or other things like that. Clearly, economic stability is a cornerstone of being able to pay child support, so we're building partnerships not only with employment providers, but a range of other programs that can help both custodial and non-custodial parents when they can't make ends meet. And then we're really looking to engage with fathers from birth or actually even before their children are born to create, again, that positive communication and really value them, not kind of just go for child support. So today we'll be talking about three strategies to increase the regular, reliable payment of child support. We'll be talking about right-sizing orders, providing children with time with their parents, and employment services for non-custodial parents. Some other strategies that child support programs have begun using include early intervention, as I mentioned. Income withholding, so taking money right out of the paycheck, is a long-standing practice but an extremely effective one. Child support agencies are also looking at techniques to reduce child support debt, particularly child support debt that's owed to states, to help parents become better able to meet their current child support obligations, as well as looking at giving all child support that's collected to the families rather than having the state retain that to repay TANF, Medicaid, or other costs. But we'll focus in on these three today. So the first thing that we will talk about are strategies to set and keep orders right. So this generally relies on child support agencies and guidelines using actual income to set the orders. So what is the parent really making? Moving away from imputation. Imputing income means, for example, that even if someone is not working 40 hours a week, you sort of assume that they are working 40 hours a week and build their child support order amount on that. So we're really moving away from that technique. And again, focusing on stable, reliable payment. So rather than a big purge payment when someone's trying to stay out of jail or just kind of a one-time big thing, really trying to make sure that child support is there sort of week after week for kids as they grow to adulthood. Another important piece of this is keeping orders, not setting them too high as a percent of income. Mark will go into much greater detail about this. And then being able to really quickly and even proactively update child support orders as income changes. And this includes a lot of outreach, so when parents are incarcerated, their orders can be changed, and then when they are released, their orders can be changed as appropriate when needed as well. The second thing we will be talking about is sort of co-parenting relationships and establishing parenting time orders. When we think about this area, the goals in general are kind of three things. The first is to really improve child well-being, so to give children in a safe and healthy way access to spend time with both of their parents. Kind of a second goal or anticipated outcome of improving parenting time is actually improving child support payment itself. Kind of building those linkages to the children, we think kind of gives meaning to that child support payment. And in fact, the research shows that non-custodial parents who do see their children more and do have parenting time arrangements or participate in those processes have better child support outcomes associated with that participation. A third goal that we think about in this area is increasing access to justice. So we value both parents' financial contributions to their children as well as really kind of their emotional contributions and their time. So thinking about, we have a whole system focused on financial support. We're really thinking about how to build kind of easy access as well to parenting time. Part of that goal, the President's budget has, since fiscal year 2012, proposed that child support agencies become responsible for addressing parenting time as part of all new child support orders with appropriate family safeguards. Congress has not enacted this in law, but there is some legislation pending that sort of promotes this idea. And the final thing we will be talking about today are employment services for non-custodial parents. Clearly, it's very difficult to pay child support if you do not have a steady job. Non-custodial parents, just like custodial parents, face some pretty significant barriers to work, education barriers, incarceration. About 25% of non-custodial parents are poor or incarcerated. Probably many more have criminal records, and less than half work full-time, full year. Now, this has really taken off in the child support community. At least 30 states, as well as the district, have work programs that involve the child support agency to serve non-custodial parents. So it's a model that has a lot of interest. Most of these programs aren't statewide, maybe just in a county, a city, or a few larger places. There are only a handful of programs that really serve at any scale. And there really are a variety of models and approaches. Because child support is involved, paying child support is not voluntary, there is a bit of a push and pull to all of the programs. Some are a bit more of a mandatory participation approach than others, and some will offer a transitional or subsidized job component as well. So there's a lot of differences out there. There are rigorous evaluations of non-custodial parent employment programs in Texas and New York have found significant positive effects on child support payment and employment. We will hear more about this from Elaine. And my office is in the middle of overseeing the National Non-Custodial Parent Employment Demonstration, which is using random assignment to evaluate the impacts in 8 sites. So again, a lot of interest in this approach in the child support community. Elaine will talk about the research as it is today. So we will be hearing from 3 very thoughtful and passionate speakers today. They have all applied research findings to public policy and program management, which is not easy. We will start out by hearing from Mark Takayesu, who manages the research unit of the Orange County, California Department of Child Support Services. He produces analytic products that drive child support program management decisions, and he will be talking about right-sizing orders or levels of child support orders. Next, we'll hear from Mary Marczak, who directs the Applied Research and Evaluation Unit at the University of Minnesota Extension Center for Family Development. She's conducted numerous evaluations of family and youth programs, over 70, and she will be discussing the Hennepin County Co-Parent Court evaluation. Finally, my colleague Elaine Sorensen, who is a technical advisor in the Office of Child Support Enforcement, who focuses on data analysis and program evaluation. She's produced much of the seminal research in the child support field, including analyses of child support debt, parents' ability to pay child support, and the anti-poverty effects of the child support program. And she will be talking about research on employment programs for non-custodial parents, programs that are led by child support. So I'll now turn it over to Mark. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Jennifer, for that great opening presentation. Today we're going to discuss right-size orders and its implications to policy and research. But more specifically, can setting right-size orders increase child support payments for families? We will begin the presentation by first discussing 2 major schools of thought. What is the best interest of the child versus appropriate or affordable child support orders? We will then go over some previous research findings on setting right-size orders, then begin discussing 2 major studies completed by the Orange County Research Unit, the California Guideline Study and the Payment Barriers Study. We will have a brief discussion on the policy implications of the research and then close with some thoughts as to why it is important to set right-size orders within the context of our current economic situation. We begin by going over some federal laws regarding setting orders. The Family Support Act of 1988 requires states to adopt guidelines for calculating child support orders. Although this law allows for deviations from guidelines, these deviations must consider the best interest of the child. But what does the best interest mean? Does it mean providing basic necessities such as food, clothing, or housing, or does it mean something more abstract, such as maintaining the same standard of living as if the child lived with both parents? Finally, every 4 years, guidelines must be reviewed to ensure appropriate child support award amounts. But what does appropriate mean? Does appropriate mean a right-sized order that an NCP can afford, or does it mean the highest possible order for the best interest of the child? A major question that can be asked is whether the guidelines throughout the years have achieved the goals of considering the best interest of the child along with setting appropriate orders. Often, both areas are seen as competing interests and are at odds with each other. After all, is it possible to fulfill the best interest of the child in mind with a high and often unaffordable order? If we perceive that the best interest of the child is defined by the highest order possible, are we considering the best interest of the entire family unit if the order isn't paid? So what does the data tell us? Well, in a nutshell, our research shows that as the ratio of the child support order amount to an NCP grosses wages, in other words, the proportion of the NCP's income that they are required to pay support, as this ratio increases, child support payments and compliance decline. Previous research on the effects of setting right-size orders isn't anything new. For instance, the first study that extensively looked at the ratio of order to wage was completed by Washington State in 2003 as a result of noticing arrears growth in their state. The major finding that came out of the study was that arrears will grow if the order amount is greater than 20% of the obligor's income. In addition to this main finding, the study also identified barriers that were associated with NCPs with large amounts of arrears due. These include items such as welfare use, limited English, alcohol, substance abuse, being on disability, etc. Other major findings of the study conclude that NCPs with limited ability to pay do in fact pay their child support when the order is a low percentage of their monthly income. Thus, given a right-sized order, NCPs with barriers do pay. The second conclusion was that NCPs that are expected to pay a large proportion of their income towards child support tend to have not just one, but multiple barriers. For both Orange County studies completed, I will briefly go over the outline of our conclusions and then explain them in a little bit more detail on the following slides. First, the ratio of order to wage is a major predictor of child support compliance and payment consistency. It is not only a major predictor, but we found it to be one of the strongest predictors of compliance out of all the variables in our model. Second, NCPs have barriers which are associated with lower child support compliance. Third, we have found that setting orders based on a full-time minimum wage when NCP actual income is not available yields little or no future child support payments. Fourth, while taking the NCP's barriers into consideration, the study shows that the ratio of order wage remains an important factor in child support compliance and payment consistency. And finally, when the ratio of order wage is above 19%, compliance and payment consistency decrease over time. Let's start by describing some of the details of the California guideline study. The goal was to identify if there is a threshold for setting child support orders. What is the ratio of order wage threshold where we begin to see declines in performance? Does performance decline when it is, let's say, for example, 19% of their gross income, or let's say 25%? We wanted to look at three areas of performance as a function of the ratio of order wage, and they include compliance, which is the percent of current support collected, payment consistency, which is the percent of months paid out of current support due out of the 12 possible months, and finally, child support payments per child. Our data set included extracting new orders of over 100,000 cases and extracting the guideline data tables from our child support system. We found that the guideline data to be highly reliable and valid for our purposes because the guideline data was linked to the reported income, which was used by the courts and commissioners to set child support order amounts. This data was then linked to the monthly CS-157 data to measure payment behavior after the court order was filed. I have also listed other variables that the guideline data contained that have been used in our research as well. Here are some initial findings by NCP income category. On this chart, all three areas, compliance, percent of months paid, and monthly payments per child by the NCP's 4 income categories, and these include cases with minimum wage income, cases with low, mid, to high income. Not surprisingly, what you find is that as income increases, performance on all three areas increase. However, what is most interesting about this table are the performance numbers for cases with minimum wage income. Not only does this category contain a significant number of cases, but it also has the lowest performance across all three areas. Interesting enough, it has lower overall performance when compared to cases with low income. The only difference between the two categories is that cases with low income are based on actual income, whereas cases with minimum wage orders are based on presumed income. This is a chart of child support compliance levels by the respective ratio of order to wage. For the most part, as the ratio of order to wage increases, compliance was found to decrease for one-child families. For this chart, a significant decrease was found between cases with 19% ratio of order wage to cases with 20%, and the most severe drop at 21% of ratio of order to wage. It is this group of cases where approximately 66% of them have presumed orders. Another step we took was to take a closer look at presumed orders and ask ourselves approximately what percentage of these cases actually made any payment of some sort. When we looked at the percentage of cases that paid $0 in 12 months, we found 56% of families, which represents the red color on the right side of the chart, did not receive any child support payments within 12 months. The data shows that the practice of setting orders based on presumed income will often lead to no child support payments. By the way, these findings were also consistent with the recent University of Maryland study, which found that the percentage of who paid nothing at all was more than twice as high for orders using imputed income than for orders using actual income. These results support OCSE's strategy of using real income versus income imputation. Knowing these findings, we wanted to dig further and ask ourselves what other factors lead to low compliance. In a survey study of about 5,000 NCPs, we asked them questions such as their education level, criminal history, employment, and other socioeconomic factors. We also asked them other questions about other perceived barriers, such as conflict with the other parent, or whether he or she thinks the support order is too high. We matched these survey responses with the CS157 data, but this time we used a predictive analytic approach to analyze the data using a tool called SAS Enterprise Miner. We used this approach in order to develop a model for new cases being established. That is, if you knew at case initiation what barriers are associated with low compliance, can it be used to make more effective decisions for that case? Here is a table of results that describe the NCP characteristics along the left column, along with the predicted compliance values on the top row. Based on the predictive model and examining characteristics that make up very low to high compliance, I'll just read off a few of the findings where you can see the difference in NCP characteristics comparing low to high predicted compliance. When looking at NCPs with predicted very low compliance, for example, 1/3 did not complete high school, they are required to pay a large proportion of the income towards child support. That's the ratio of order to wage. Most are quite young when we first becoming a parent, and that's the variable called the average age, the NCP at firstborn child. Most are unemployed, and 73% have some sort of criminal history. So from a policy perspective, understanding these barriers at case initiation is highly important for policymakers to set right-size orders and or refer these NCPs that have multiple barriers to family-centered services. Here is an example of a chart that looks at whether setting right-size orders for NCPs with low education is an effective strategy for improving compliance. The 4 areas represent for education levels, from did not complete high school to obtaining a college degree. As you can see, compliance increases as education level increases. The blue bars represent cases where the ratio of order wage was 19% or under, in other words, a right-size order, and the yellow represents cases where the orders were higher than 19%. As you can see, for cases with low education, compliance was substantially higher for right-size orders, and this holds true for all education levels. When examining cases by ratio of order wage and criminal history, we find the same effect. right-sized orders compared to high unaffordable orders yields higher compliance for cases with either a felony or misdemeanor. So when discussing solutions for NCPs with barriers, Elaine Sorensen will talk more extensively about the effect of work-oriented programs and their positive effects on increasing child support payments. For our own Orange County commissioners, the results of these studies were discussed and presented to them. The courts have taken this information and gone a step further in using it to make effective decisions in the courtroom and to set right-sized orders. Finally, with regards to family-centered services, Orange County has opened up its Community Resource Center where parents can obtain information for a variety of services within the county, such as clothing, food, legal services, health care, and employment services. Parents can also obtain on-site services such as genetic testing, forms workshops, and assistance from a family law facilitator. So here is a recap of some of the major policy implications of both studies. First, set new orders no greater than 19% for one child family increases the probability of making consistent payments even for NCPs with barriers. The information in the guideline study is a useful tool for other states to use when re-examining their own state guidelines. We, in fact, encourage other state and local researchers to analyze their own guideline data in conjunction with their policy and on setting orders to maximize future compliance. If actual income is not reported, simply take the extra time to determine the actual income. And finally, it is important to understand up front the NCP's payment barriers in order to set right-sized orders and refer these individuals to family-centered services. And finally, why is it important? This chart shows the unemployment rate from 1997 to 2013 for the U.S., California, and for Orange County. The shaded area represents the period of the Great Recession from December 2007 to June 2009. As you can see, the unemployment has risen dramatically since the Great Recession, and although the rates have come down, it looks like we are still in a recovery phase. In other words, there are many families who are still hurting financially, which makes it even more critical for us to understand the barriers that they face and to ensure that an affordable order is set. And finally, here's a chart of the percent of children under age 18 in poverty for Orange County, California, and the U.S. Since the Great Recession, poverty rates have grown significantly and remain high. So given the fact that the child support program has lifted 1 million people out of poverty each year and is a significant source of income for poor families, the practice of setting right-sized orders in conjunction with family-centered services are critical measures to improve family self-sufficiency in the long term. So with that said, that concludes the portion of this webinar. And if there are any questions, I can go ahead and transition it to Mary.
Hi, everyone. So today I'm going to be talking about the Co-Parent Court project. This project is a partnership between the Hennepin County Family Court and community service providers serving unmarried parents who kind of get thrown into the court system through paternity establishment. So typically how they get into the system is the mothers are applying for public assistance and there is no signed recognition of paternity. And so then the court goes after establishing that paternity. And so we are primarily working with parents coming through the system to establish paternity and or establish court-ordered paternity. Sorry. Thank you so much for the opportunity to talk about this project. I just wanted to say a quick
provide a little bit of context for where this project is and talk a little bit about Hennepin County. Hennepin County in Minnesota is our largest urban county, with Minneapolis being its largest city. More than 35% of all births in Hennepin County are to unmarried parents, and 86% of U.S.-born African-American women in Minneapolis giving birth were unmarried. As part of the larger planning for this project, the court completed a survey of single mothers and fathers involved with Hennepin County Family Court. And really the primary purpose of the survey were to be able to clearly describe who these single parents are and to identify the needs of these parents prior to developing and designing the program. And what they're finding, and I think the other presenters talked a lot about some of the issues around poverty and education and employment. But likewise, with this population of unmarried parents coming through Hennepin County court system, they found that about a third did not complete high school, so low education. About 2/3 were working less than full-time. And of those who were working full-time, nearly half had been at their current jobs for less than 1 year. About a quarter of the mothers and 60% of the fathers, about a quarter of the mothers and 50% of the fathers had a criminal record. About a quarter of the mothers and 60% of the fathers did not have stable housing, and one in 5, both mothers and fathers, reported having mental health or substance abuse issues. So that is our target audience. So as I said before, the program participants are coming through the paternity calendar system. The judges, the family court judges, were seeing firsthand these overwhelming odds that are stacked against the families who are coming before the court each year to establish paternity and determining responsibilities for families. And a typical paternity calendar was a mass calendar. Fathers were notified to come to court. If they wanted to sign recognition of parentage, they can. And then they would go and get, really the whole court was focused on child support. There were little to no services, and were given sort of reasonable parenting time was a language, but really leaving that up to the mother to offer to define what reasonable parenting time meant. So on the flip side of this, while they were dealing with these the unmarried parents coming through the system, in Hennepin County, what they were seeing that over the past decade, the court really had been focusing on reducing trauma of divorce, but by undergoing pretty quiet but dramatic transformation in how divorce cases are handled. So today, Hennepin County families can go through family court quickly, more economically, and with less acrimony. They were given, with parents without parenting agreements, are required to attend 8 hours of parent education. They were offered intensive case management, and were often directed to appropriate services that they might need. And so they had been doing this for divorcing families, but these opportunities were provided for single-parent families or for unmarried parents coming through Hennepin County Court. So the co-parent court project was developed to to see if they can use these same kind of innovations for unmarried parents and their children. The co-parent court was really modeled after a problem-solving court. These courts, problem-solving courts, share a fundamental premise that the courts can address underlying problems rather than simply processing cases mechanically, as it has been in the past. It was the decision-making was much more client-centered, and that they would partner with a host of existing community systems and organizations to provide ongoing services to unmarried parents. The goals of the co-parent court project really are, they wanted to target both parents. This is not a father involvement project, child support payment, increasing child support payments only. It really was about targeting both parents, and they will focus most of their required programmatic. Hello? They would focus most of the required intervention components on helping to develop quality co-parenting relationships. Other things that they were interested in were increases in paternal participation, increase in child support payments from the non-custodial parents, really getting parents to take ownership or responsibility for creating together a parenting plan and parenting time orders, and not to let the courts do it for them. And then all of this really is to improve outcomes for children by helping unmarried parents to work together to parent their children. Just a key program components or elements are there's an initial intake and case management service, but the initial intake happens at the courts. When parents come to court, the judge talks to them about the co-parent court project, the importance of the role of fathers in their children's lives. They get told to attend 12-hour co-parent education class. The 12-hour co-parenting education classes were adapted from the Together We Can curriculum, which was developed originally by Dr. Karen Shire and her colleagues, and they actually showed success in among African American participants, and both in Michigan and Alabama. Karen was part of the larger steering committee for the project, so she provided much assistance in terms of how do we adapt this to the African American participants in the Twin Cities area. So in addition to communication, resolution, and building healthy relationships, and at one point, a county child support officer comes and answers key questions about child support, about budgeting, and some key components of a parenting agreement that can be adopted by the court. There is also the other required element is for the parents to work together to come up with a joint parenting agreement. And they typically take one of the last workshops to go, and the family educators work with the parents to work on, to look through the components of the agreement. And they jot down initial thoughts about how they would want to do, how much parenting time they would like, how they want to raise their children together. And the parenting agreement covers such issues as legal custody, decision-making, about medical care, about religion, about parenting time, vacations, and how each other will be involved in their children's activities. If they can work together without any help, they can go ahead and do so. If they need just some little help, the family educators sit with the two parents to work through the parenting plan with them. But if there's a bit more conflict, there is a mediation service that is offered to the parents to work with them. There are also at initial intake, the family educator meets with individuals to identify key needs, social service needs that they might have around employment, around job supports, housing, and all of that. And there were many social service agencies within the community that are known to the participants that offer these services that the project paid for, but free to the parents. Now, one of the pieces or components that was not identified as a key program element, but that we're seeing over and over, that was extremely helpful for the parents, was what we called supportive services. And the project paid for things like transportation, child care, money for certain emergency resources that they might need. And this was not just for the parents to attend the parenting classes that were court mandated or ordered by the court. This was for if they have a job interview, if they were going to sign up for classes at the local college. So any kinds of supports that they would work with them one-on-one to identify those and make sure that they have the necessary supportive services to get to the programs, the jobs, and the educational classes that they needed to get to. Just quickly, the project is a demonstration project, and there was a need to really understand the effectiveness of the program. And so there was a study. It's a randomized control trial study where parents are randomly assigned into either an intervention or a control group. So like I said earlier, that they're coming through the paternity calendar to establish paternity. Once that is established, the court administrator used a checklist to identify eligible cases off the paternity calendar. And the eligibility criteria were that both parents spoke English, because there was not enough resources for translators, no active child support cases against either parent, no order of protection between the parents. They both had to be at least 18 or older and live within the zip codes where many of the unmarried parents were coming from, mostly in North Minneapolis. The court administrator, once they identify eligible cases, would then randomly assign the cases using a randomly generated 0-1 numbers table to assign into control or intervention. Control cases go through the court process as usual. We outlined that a little while ago on Tuesdays. And then the intervention parents were asked to come to co-parent court, which was on Thursdays, and it was actually moved to a separate building to allow for more room and for the individual intakes and case management and all of that. Participants were approached to consent to be it. So they're already enrolled in co-parent court or in the control group, but participants were approached to consent to be in the study once paternity is established and both parents show up in court. Just very quickly, it was a very extensive data collection for this project. For the parents, we do have a pre-post follow-up design asking a host of, it was about a 220-item survey, asking them a host of different kinds of questions about quality of their relationships, both with the co-parent and with their children. There were questions about their employment, housing, some of those family life situations, their own sense of well-being, and things like that. And the last, at follow-up, the parents were interviewed through a face-to-face or phone interview. There was also a very complex management information system data software where all partners entered information about any referral services and where the intervention parents were in the process, in the program. There's also the court data, like child support payment data, and also extensive process and implementation evaluation, as well as a faculty member in applied economics was looking at all of this with a lens of a cost-benefit study. Just quickly about the participants, we ended up with 208 control parents and 454 intervention parents. Now, this is highly unusual given that this is a randomly assigned project, so you would expect equal numbers for control and intervention. And so we've been having, or we have had over the past 3.5 years, multiple meetings to try to figure out the case of these missing control cases. And we did extensive amount of going back and re-reviewing the randomization process, make sure that they're following the procedures. We looked at the calendars to see are there more on the calendar for the intervention parents and control, and none of those bore out. And we couldn't, this is still a very much of a mystery, except for the fact that from the very beginning, the intervention parents are treated differently. They receive a whole different kind of letter from the courts saying, it's an exciting opportunity, come to co-parent court. It is, and so that's the kind of letter that they get. When they get to court, it's a very different experience where the judges are talking to them. They meet with case managers. They meet with the parent educators. And so we're thinking that some of it is how they are treated from the very beginning. There's also some sense from the community partners that there is it's a pretty connected and networked community in North Minneapolis, and that there is very positive chatter out in the communities about the co-parent court project. And you have to remember that parents were getting enrolled throughout the 2.5-3 years. And so it wasn't that everybody got enrolled at the same time. It was rolling enrollment. So there was a lot of chatter out in the community. So, but that's going to be something interesting for us to think about. As expected, the participant profiles pretty much match up with some of the things that we had talked about. Predominantly African American, high percentage of unemployed. Just that most have never been married. 92% of the parents in the study were never married. Few parents actually at the time of data collection were reporting that they were cohabitating with one another, about 7%. In terms of children, most have only one child with their co-parent, about 79%, but majority of the parents, and it's over 2/3, have more than one child under the age of 18. And nearly half the children were 2 years and under at enrollment. They were really worried because a key component of the intervention are these 12 hours of classes, that they broke it down into 6 sessions, 2 hours, or 4 sessions, 4 3-hour sessions. whether they would come, even if they were court mandated to go. And just very quickly, if you look at the slide, it's a little bit complex, but when you get down to it, about 67%, so 307 participants in the intervention group were considered completers, where they completed a minimum of 3 out of 4 or minimum of 4 out of 6 classes. Just pretty early because we're still collecting follow-up data, but promising results. We just wanted to talk a little bit about the child support payment data because that was pretty interesting. Now, this is a very gross, we're talking about averages across all of these parents. But initially, the control group, or at the time, control group, were paying a total of 69% of the child support amount owed on average across the control group. And interestingly, this number is almost identical to what the percentage that they were collecting prior to this project. So that's matching up quite nicely. When we looked at the total intervention group, there was a slight increase in terms of the total percentage paid to about 73%, which is very small. But the child support office was excited because they said any increase is great news. It is when we were able to start teasing out those parents who were considered completers. So they completed all the classes. They actually came together and built a parenting plan, and they received the social services that they were referred to. Then the picture started to look very different, especially, well, when both mom and dad completed the intervention, they collected 87% of the total amount owed. Well, if you look at the whether or not do both parents need to be completing the intervention, if you just look at the fathers, where fathers completed the intervention, it's pretty comparable to when both fathers and mothers complete the classes. And so when fathers complete the intervention, 86% of the child support payment owed are getting paid on average by these fathers. I'm just trying to figure out if there seems to be some sound issues, and I want to make sure it's not from my end. Okay.
Mary, this is Deborah. Everything okay?
Yeah. Are you hearing me okay?
I am, and I really hope the presenters, the participants are as well at this point.
Okay. In terms of the parenting time, there were some mixed results. Intervention mothers reported significant change in the frequency with which fathers sees their child, but their corresponding fathers did not report that they were seeing their children more. So, but on average, intervention mothers reported an increase of 59 hours a month that the father sees their child, whereas the control mothers reported an average increase of about 24 hours. And again, recall that these are paternity establishment cases, so for some of you would expect that even control mothers would report an average increase because some of them they didn't even know that child existed prior to coming to court. But you can see that the intervention mothers are reporting almost double what the intervention or control mothers are in terms of total numbers of hours that the father sees their child each month. There were no, on the bottom you can't read it, but there were no differences for intervention or control fathers in terms of the amount of time that they were seeing their children. some really kind of interesting results are coming out in terms of for mothers, there were a lot more, I would say, significant results in terms of some of the instrumental supports, like they're getting more child support payment. They're saying that the fathers are seeing their children more frequently and more often. The fathers are not reporting those kinds of things, but what they are reporting are some of the more self-efficacy kinds of outcomes. They're reporting significantly more likely to be satisfied with the amount of time that they are spending with their child, their involvement in their child's life, and changes in their perception of the importance of the role of fathers. And this is not surprising, given from the beginning that they enter the court, they are told how important fathers are in the lives of their children. That is a consistent message that goes across the court, the parent education, and all the social support organizations are all sharing the same message. Only intervention mothers are reporting significantly greater change in the positive direction on the co-parenting alliance, the quality of their co-parenting, and again, no difference for fathers. Those are the, again, real preliminary results. We do have 2 special issue articles that will be coming out in this early next year on some of this, so if you want to get into the outcomes more. But I think some of just some quick things about this differential attendance at court for intervention and control cases. I really do think there is something there. I know it's not good for the research side of it, but in terms of programmatic side, that you can make a difference in terms of even for parents to show up at court when they're treated differently, even at the initial contact, and the positive communication that's out there in the community. And so I think that's something that we want to take a look at more. Throughout this, the intervention mothers seem to benefit most, especially in the preliminary results and findings, which is interesting given that really the focus was on father involvement. And many people were part of this because they saw this as a fathering, improving father involvement type of a project. But when you do that and you involve the mothers, that the intervention mothers do benefit from a project that focuses on fathering and father parenting time. Again, a lot of positive things out in the community about this program, as well as the court has decided to institutionalize co-parent courts, and now we're just seeing how that will work out without all of the support structures of the project management and all of that. The court has decided to take on all of the project management and providing the services and that sort of thing. And so that's our report on the co-parent court project. So unless you have any specific questions, I'm going to turn it over to Elaine.
Thanks, Mary. So I'm going to be talking about work-oriented services for non-custodial parents. As Jennifer Burnszynski mentioned, the child support program works well for families where the non-custodial parent is employed, but it's not very effective for those families where the non-custodial parent is not working. And much of the child support that goes unpaid is owed by unemployed non-custodial parents. And they often face multiple employment barriers such as intermittent employment, limited education, criminal records, and a lot of these non-custodial parents could benefit from an employment-oriented program. Given this great need that's been out there, and Jennifer mentioned that about 25% of the non-custodial parents are poor or incarcerated, and about half of them are working full-time year-round. So that given the need for employment services, it's not surprising that there have been a number of national demonstrations over the years to address this issue. I've highlighted here on this slide the major ones that have occurred in the last 20 years. starting with Parents' Fair Share in the mid-1990s, followed by the Welfare to Work grants that took place out of Department of Labor in the late 1990s and went through 2003. The Federal Office of Child Support Enforcement has been an active player in this area and issued many responsible fatherhood grants in the late 1990s using its discretionary funds. And it also was involved in the Partners for Fragile Families demonstration in the early 2000s. And then finally, there was a demonstration that was privately funded by the Mott Foundation called Fathers at Work. That was a national multi-site demonstration in the early 2000s. All of these demonstrations do have evaluations that are available on the web that you can look at. I wanted to just highlight the Parents' Fair Share demonstration, in part because it's the only one of the ones I listed there that used a random assignment evaluation approach to examine the impact of these services. This slide shows you, gives you a few specifics about Parents' Fair Share. It was conducted in 7 sites in the mid-90s. The program targeted unemployed, non-custodial parents who were behind in their child support and had children on AFDC, now called TANF. So it wasn't the non-custodial parents were not only unemployed, but they had to have children on the TANF program at that time. All of the participants in the demonstration were court-ordered into the program, and then they were randomly assigned into treatment and control groups. The treatment consisted of employment and training services, a component called peer support, which was essentially a fatherhood curriculum taught in a peer environment. In addition, there were enhanced child support services available and mediation, and that was the package of services. Now, the unfortunate result of this demonstration was that the impact of these services was rather limited. They did find that the treatment group was more likely to pay child support, and they were more likely to pay reliably, which were important outcomes. But the 2 outcomes that Parents' Fair Share set out for itself initially were to increase the amount of child support paid and to increase the earnings of the non-custodial parents. And they fell short on those 2 outcomes when you looked across all of the 7 sites. Now, what you do find is that there were 2 sites of the 7 that were led by child support programs that were much more successful than the other sites. And many of us in the child support program took away from that the child support program needs to play a major role in these programs for them to succeed. Now, this next slide presents the world today and shows you what states are involved in, what state child support programs are involved in providing work-oriented programs for unemployed non-custodial parents. Jennifer mentioned this in her presentation. This just gives you a map visualization of that. As she said, many of these programs are small, but there is a broad interest and consensus within the child support program that offering these kinds of services is a useful component of the child support program. What's happened since, if you look at those programs nationwide, there's sort of what I call four basic models that have evolved. There's the court-ordered program, which is what the Parents' Fair Share model was based on, and that is being used. 2 examples I list here have evaluation results: the Texas NCP Choices program, and then the South Carolina Alternatives to Incarceration. That is one approach to providing services. Another variant of the court-ordered model is what is called the problem-solving court. It's also court-ordered, but it tends to have more services than just employment services. The evaluation results that I'm aware of in that area is from North Carolina and Wake County. The other model that I will be talking in more depth about is what we call the child support-led, but a voluntary program. It's not a court-ordered. It's individuals come in on a voluntary basis. And 2 evaluations that describe state-led programs in this area are one in Colorado and another in Tennessee. And then finally, there are many fatherhood-led voluntary programs also out there. And one example that has an evaluation that you might be interested in is the Minnesota Fathers Project. That's also in Minneapolis. Now, there are, as all of those examples I gave have evaluation results, but none of them use a random assignment evaluation design to measure the impacts of those interventions. Instead, the comparison groups are often not very similar if they have one at all. The NCP Choices program in Texas has probably the strongest impact evaluations. They use a propensity score matching approach to identify their comparison group. And so the evaluations are interesting and useful, that we've learned lessons from them, but they haven't been as strong as they could be, except for the NCP Choices evaluation. This was the background for when New York set out to implement its fatherhood program, and this started in 2006. It decided to implement a 3-year pilot program in 5 locations across the state of New York, and it was going to provide employment services, a fatherhood component, and have child support be actively involved. And that was the package that was legislatively enacted in New York in 2006. So I've just listed here the organizations were in those locations, and I'll just show you where those locations are geographically in New York. So there was Jamestown and Buffalo over in the west, Syracuse, and then there were 2 sites in New York City. So there were 5 sites altogether. So the idea behind the fatherhood program in New York was to, again, provide employment services to a limited group of individuals. The eligibility criteria is listed here. They had to have a child support order, be in New York in the New York Child Support Program. They had to be unemployed or working less than 20 hours a week. They had to be low income, and they had to be within a certain age range. The recruitment was very different here than had been customary prior to the New York Fatherhood Program. It was not a court-ordered program. In New York, that was not legally allowed. So there were court referrals, but even that was not the majority of referrals into the program. Most of the referrals came in from self-referrals or from other components of the programs that were actively involved. The programs that were part of this demonstration had long-standing programs in their communities and knew how to recruit people. They had well-established programs. Some of them used television advertisements. Others used other kinds of means to bring people in on a voluntary basis. The services consisted of employment-oriented program services, job readiness, job search, access to job developers, and job training in most of the locations. They all were required to have a fatherhood or parenting component to the package, and also there were child support-related services that were also provided in all of the locations. The participants in this program were a highly disadvantaged group. They were almost all male. 79% had a high school education or less. A majority of them had never been married. 70% had a criminal record. 80% were African American or Hispanic, and nearly all were unemployed at enrollment. We designed, Urban Institute did the evaluation for the New York Fatherhood demonstration, and we designed a comparison group using the propensity score matching method that the NCP Choices demonstration had used. We used administrative data from the child support program to identify men who lived in the same counties as the treatment sites, and they had to have an open child support case. And then we used propensity score matching to find an individual in that county that looked a lot like the pilot participant. We matched on a lot of demographic characteristics, prior employment and earnings histories, and their child support characteristics. What we found were that the individuals in the treatment group were much more likely to paying child support and had much higher earnings, as I say here. And the next slide show you more specifically what happened with the earnings and child support payments. This graph shows you over time. At 0 is the initial period of enrollment, the first quarter. At the time of enrollment, both the comparison group, which is the red dotted line, and the participants, which is the blue dashed line, they start out at the same point, each making about $800 a quarter. This includes people who have no earnings at all. And then over time, over the next 4 quarters, we follow the earnings of the comparison group and the earnings of the participant group. And you can see that a major gap emerges between the earnings of the participants and the comparison group, so that the participants are earning considerably more than the comparison group. And it's about a 22% increase in earnings for the participants over the comparison group after enrollment. And then again, with the child support results, it's similar. They start out about the same. We have a smaller sample for the child support payments because of administrative data technicality problems. But nonetheless, we were able to find a group of individuals who had similar characteristics at the beginning, and their child support payment characteristics were about the same. And then as the intervention transpired over that year, the payment behavior of the participants is much higher than it is for the comparison group. And in fact, it's 38% higher. 38% more child support was paid by the participants than the comparison group. So we found both very positive results on child support payments and earnings from this intervention. So the lessons that we learned from this demonstration was, one, and most importantly, I think, is that the voluntary programs can work. There had been some question about whether that was a viable way to run a child support program that provided employment services. And this demonstration showed that voluntary programs, if they're well implemented, can have positive impacts on child support and earnings. And we also found that the child support and the workforce components, those two programs, can work together and provide significant services as a group and can lead to significant impacts. Now, this model used what we called a case manager model to implement services, and that seemed to be a very successful approach. All of the 5 sites used this model. And we also found that the basic employment services of just job search and job readiness didn't seem to be enough, that the job developers were really important in finding jobs for the participants and getting those earnings impacts that we found. Also, short-term training, which was available in a number of the sites, also seemed to really provide to a small group of people, but had a real positive benefit on the earnings side. So those were the basic lessons we had from our demonstration. And so with that, and going forward, just to mention the final slide here, is that there are a number of national demonstrations that are in the field at this point, and they're all being evaluated using a random assignment evaluation. And so we'll have some more very strong empirical evidence going forward on the effectiveness of these kinds of job programs for unemployed non-custodial parents. I've listed 3 of them that I'm aware of that are all national multi-site demonstrations. There's the Enhanced Transitional Jobs Demonstration, which the Department of Labor is leading, which has already finished its enrollment period. It's still providing services, but it was the first random assignment demonstration started just a couple of years ago. Then there's what's called the Parents and Children Together demonstration. This is of 4 fatherhood programs that are being funded from the Administration for Children and Families through the Office of Family Assistance and their fatherhood grants. This is being evaluated or funded by the Office of Planning, Research, and Evaluation here at ACF. And they are still collecting enrollment as that part of that demonstration. And then finally, there's the Child Support Non-Custodial Parent Employment Demonstration, which is being conducted and led out of the Office of Child Support Enforcement under Jennifer's division called Program Innovation. And that program just started a couple of years ago. We had a year of planning, and then we started random assignment enrollment about a year ago. And so we're in a 3-year window, so we have 2 more years of random assignment enrollment ahead of us. So in a few years, we'll have a lot more information about what kinds of programs work to provide employment services to this population. So stay tuned, and we'll have even more information than we have today. Thanks very much.
Thank you so much, Elaine, and thank you, Mary, Mark, and Jennifer, for all of the valuable information. For those of you listening who are not able to hear in the beginning, first of all, thank you so much for all of you for staying with us during the technical difficulties, letting us know and working with us to grab onto the phone lines and switch out that way. But you may have missed the fact that this webinar, the recording of it, as well as a transcript and other materials, will all be posted to our events archive on the SSRC website, which is opressrc.org. You will see tabs at the top of our website. One says Search Library, and under that you will find our events archive. It usually takes us a couple of weeks to make sure everything is accurate and 508 compliant before we post it. We did have one question that came in. I'm not sure if the person, it's actually disappeared from my screen. I'm not sure if that's another technical difficulty. I think it's worth putting out there because it may be on many people's minds, despite hearing quite a bit of solutioning discussion and indirect mention of consequences for these folks. But the question is, please explain more about not imputing income. What about parents who are voluntarily unemployed or underemployed? And I think this came in, Jennifer, during your presentation. I wanted to start with you and see if you wanted to say more about that, and then also Mark or anyone else, if you want to talk about, if you want to address that would be great.
Sure. So that's a great question. I think what we actually find is that imputing income just doesn't really seem to work that well in terms of getting child support payments to children. So for parents who don't have income or assets, we are hoping that we can do a little bit better, as Elaine talked about, by potentially linking them to employment services or sort of comprehensive employment interventions that include maybe a parenting component or a fatherhood component or a parenting time component, or things that can address what we sometimes term as both ability and willingness to pay. But I think we just haven't seen a lot of cases where setting an order not based on actual income results in child support payment, which is our goal there. I don't know if others would like to comment as well.
Thank you. And any of the other presenters want to say more?
Well, this is Elaine Sorensen. One thing in terms of voluntary unemployment, we're not saying we encourage the courts to examine any assets that the person may have. So if someone is hiding information, or we encourage courts to look at the actual situation and not make up income. So if someone is voluntarily unemployed but lives in a mansion, that would be relevant information. I mean, these are extreme examples, but our point is that you should look at the actual facts of the case and not make up or impute an income level that's untied to the situation of the individual. I hope that helps.
Thank you. We have another question. We actually have two more so far. Please use your Q&A. Even if we don't get to the questions in the next minute or so, we will make sure that we find you answers. And we'll post those as well on the website later. The recommended, Mark, I believe this is for you. The recommended rate for one-child family is 19% actual income for right-sized orders. How does this increase with additional children?
With additional children, I think it goes up to about 25%, and then for 3 children, it's about 35%. So I really wanted to just focus on, for this purpose, just one-child families, because it's basically makes up 70% of your caseload. We've in the study that we've done more thoroughly, we looked at those other 2 categories, and it's available on our website at County of Orange website if you're interested.
And I do apologize. I see that there was one more question, but our time is up, and we have to be strict with our timeline. Plus, I hear an echo that I'm not sure how to get rid of. Thank you, everyone, so much for staying with us with all of our technical difficulties. We will get to that other question and make sure it's posted along with the other questions and answers we heard today. I appreciate it. I hope you will take our survey, which helps us to continue to improve our processes, and you have a wonderful rest of your day.
Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. This does conclude today's presentation. You may now disconnect.